cualquier lugar del mundo. Tribuna Radio en el www.tribunaradio.us. Tribuna Radio, la música que quieres escuchar. Tribuna Radio, la mejor programación. Tribuna Radio, programas de entrevistas. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 5, o escríbenos a sales@tribunaradio.us.
¿Te perdiste tu programa favorito en Tribuna TV? Esto no volverá a pasar porque ahora te presentamos videos on demand. Cualquier día, a cualquier hora y en cualquier lugar. Visita nuestra sección Videos on Demand en nuestra página web o en nuestras aplicaciones para Android y iPhone. Entra al nombre del programa que quieres ver, elígelo con un solo clic y disfruta de los mejores programas de Tribuna TV. La televisión en sus manos.
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Está empezando el show del Dr. Roy Aranda, donde abordaremos temas sobre separación niños de padres, casos de violencia, traumas con los indocumentados, cómo resistir ante tiempos de pandemias. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6, y haz tus propias preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Good evening, my dear Tribuna TV viewers. Buenas noches, queridos televidentes de la famosísima Tribuna TV. Thank you for joining us. Gracias por estar con nosotros esta noche, Abril 7. Today is April 7th, and we have hopefully an exciting and informative educational show. Tenemos un programa, pensamos que bastante interesante y educacional, y se trata de temas con los niños. It deals with aspects of the children, but of course, we're looking at trauma and how children cope with the types of trauma that children experience, trauma que los jóvenes niños experimentan, y cómo bregan, cómo ellos hacen frente a ese trauma. And of course, it's not just the children, but their parents, their loved ones, caretakers, teachers, and so forth. So much of what we cover today will certainly have some applicability to adults, So I have a wonderful guest today, La Doctora Dixelia Lopez, Dr. Dixelia Lopez, who I'm delighted and excited that she is fully bilingual. Habla el español perfectamente bien. And let me share with you as well that the show is being taped live right now on YouTube. And by tomorrow, we will have recordings, of course, on YouTube. Tendremos la grabación en YouTube, Tribuna TV's website, Vimeo, and social media. It'll be posted widespread so that the viewers who were not able to attend today will have access to it. And even if you attend today, you'll have access to it tomorrow. The reason why I say this is we have many informative slides. And many of you, I encourage you to take photos of the educational, informative slides while the show is presented live. And when we have the recording, you're free to take screenshots. And I encourage you to do that because it's difficult to assimilate everything. So the show for today, let me also welcome and introduce my producer, Oscar Luna. Oscar, si quieres saludar a los televidentes. So Oscar, aside from telling all of us to be careful and I hope that we're well, is sharing that we have an incredible amount of rain and wind here. Dixelia, I know that you're in the Westchester area. You told me that it's windy and rainy here. I'm in Suffolk and it's raining and windy, and I so hope that we do not have any power outages, because if we do, that means we have to redo the show, and that's difficult. It's very difficult to do. So hopefully we won't have any problems with the recording. So let me get started. The show for today is called The Children of Trauma and the Journey to Hope and Healing. And again, as I said, we're focusing obviously on children and traumatic events of children. And I have a wonderful guest, Dr. Dixelia Lopez, who I will introduce momentarily. Don Oscar, por favor, si me puede poner el primer slide. Okay, so here you see, here's the title, Children of Trauma, Journey to Hope and Healing. I'm the host. I hope you all are aware of that by now. My guest, Dixelia Lopez, who has a doctoral degree in psychology, and my consultant, who you've met on many previous occasions, Dr. Peter Canaris. I'm giving him a shout out. Peter has been a wonderful source of assistance in terms of reviewing some of the work that I do, giving me additional pointers, and he has this knack as well. It's a gift for coming up with titles. So I have to give him credit. He comes up with these titles. The title, I came up with an earlier version, sort of a precursor to this title. But in all fairness to Peter, the title is his, and it's a very good title because we're focusing on trauma, children exposed to trauma, and the journey to hope and healing. So we are going to focus, obviously, on children traumatized from exposure to tragedies and disasters. And the exposure, there's many ways of getting exposure. Obviously, children are watching TV, they have access to their cell phones, to iPads, to social media, they're exposed to traumatic incidents on a daily basis. And of course, there's children who are exposed to real trauma in the sense that they are living it. Either they're witnessing it live or they're witnessing through their parents or loved ones. So there's many ways of experiencing the trauma. In terms of watching, being exposed to trauma in the news, on TV, there is considerable wealth of research in terms of the impact that this has on people, not just children, but all people, adults as well. Certainly following 9/11, the Twin Towers, the collapse of the Twin Towers, there was a huge amount of research that went into looking at the impact. So we can certainly use 9/11 as a model in terms of understanding and realizing that people who are affected by something of that tremendous magnitude would likely experiment and experience trauma with many of the incidents that are happening today. I'm in particular concerned presently about the toxic exposure and traumatizing effect on children due to the constant news stream, the graphic stream of images and news stories taking place in Ukraine, where even recently, we're seeing bodies and mass graves and children having to flee from Ukraine. And this is the exposure to constant shelling, relocations, injuries, loss of loved ones, loss of amenities. I mean, we take for granted water and food and medication. Well, many of us, certainly, some viewers unfortunately do not have proper health benefits, and you suffer. I'm aware that you suffer because of it. So imagine not having it at all. Or limitations in food and water, or contaminated water due to toxic exposure. So it's not just Ukraine, and I do want to give, I do want to mention my heart goes out so much to the people who are suffering in Ukraine. I did want to mention as well that I am sponsoring a fundraiser to help children in Ukraine due to the hardship that they're experiencing due to these relocations, the trauma, and funds that are collected will be sent to professional fundraising agencies in Ukraine to assist these children. So we routinely see, as I mentioned, violence of all sorts in the news, tragic events, natural disasters, human-created disasters, even COVID-19. COVID-19, we've had some amount of silencing in the news brought on by what's been tragically going on for now a month and a half in Ukraine. But, with the Omicron variant that was just around December, and we have the new variant, the BA2. And even now, there's the newest one, XC, and I have no idea at this point what the research shows in terms of what possible consequences that have. We are seeing a new wave as a result of this, and infections, if you look at some of the statistics that I monitor and follow closely, looking at the American Academy of Pediatrics and Children's Hospital Association, just March 31, okay, that's just a little bit over a week ago, 19% of available cases were children. Research points to PTSD-like symptoms in children. We've talked about PTSD many times in the past, even just by exposure to the news. In addition to TV, children have ready access to smartphones, tablets, social media, makes the exposure inescapable. You turn the TV on, anytime you get the news, you're going to see something breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. You'll see chyrons, you'll see all sorts of news flashes, and it's easy to be overwhelmed by it. Along with emotional reactions, there are a multitude of behavioral changes, health consequences brought on by stress. It's important to consider chronological age and social maturity. I have for quite some time now dedicated these shows, and tonight's show is dedicated to our children and to the parents who care for them. So without further ado, let me introduce Dixelia Lopez. Put on, por favor, Oscar, el número dos. So Dixelia, I had to like take a real close look at the photo you sent and the way you look today. I mean, it's amazing. And kudos to you for looking so sharp in both the photo and live. So I just wanted to compliment you. I wanted to compliment you on that. Very briefly, and I'm going to ask Dixelia just to add a little bit. I'm probably going to try to cut this a little short. She's the director of school counseling, Ossining Union Free School District of Westchester, New York. Educator, strategist, leader, content developer, and trauma-trained practitioner. So that's wonderful because the show's on trauma. 20 years of experience in the field of education and bilingual school psychology. Her work has focused on developing strong relationships in support of equitable, culturally responsive, trauma-informed practices for children and resilience. And I know that one of the things that I'll focus on in one of the slides, you were kind enough to provide a number of informative resources to me. And I tacked on the relevance and importance of language and culture, and also special needs children. I think that these also need to be considered, how important it is, the type of exposure they have and what it means for us as psychologists and parents to try to help comfort them and try to help them cope with trauma like these that we will be talking about today. So strong believer in power, positive thinking, and resilience. We will focus on resilience, positive psychology. Her field experience and community action research in Africa, and her dissertation on immigrants and refugees from Myanmar, Burma, focused on trauma through the psychological lens of resilience. Again, a very important thing that we focused on this show in the past several times. Cultural competency and capacity building within ecological framework. So Dr. Dixelia uses her expertise in New York State Association of School Psychologists. And I think you're also a member of the National Association of School Psychologists.
Correct.
It's right there, National Association and New York State Association of Bilingual Education. She holds several degrees, including the doctorate in international psychology, with a focus on organizational systems and trauma, a master's in educational psychology, an advanced degree in school psychology, and a master's in educational leadership. So I had to cut your 30-page CV a little bit. I hope you don't mind. Don Oscar, puedes sacar el slide. And I wanted to give a shout out to my my friend Peter Faustino. He was a guest just 2 shows ago. One that I had one of my great nieces. I decided to get rid of the great and just make her a niece. But I had him with her, and this was like important to me because I thought at that point with Peter and my niece that we were focusing on the needs of children, because so often we tend to look at adults, and even when looking at adults, we'll give them some pointers or recommendations or suggestions for the work with their children. And here I actually had my niece, as a guest and a presenter, and it was like really wonderful. So Peter, thank you so much, because Peter introduced me to Dixelia, and I'm delighted that he did so. And welcome, Dixelia, and I'm going to turn it over to you if I missed anything and you'd just like to give a shout out and or add anything to my introduction.
Bueno, muchas gracias por tenerme aquí. Thank you for having me here. Definitely, trauma and resilience has been part of my work, as you see, and anything that has to do with culturally responsive practices, that's what I'm here for. We're going to talk about that a little bit, and hopefully you'll have a good takeaway from it, because resilience, I think, is central to developing hope and making sure that we have some coping and some strategies around how to navigate through so many stressors. Okay.
Today we're going to focus on sources of trauma, a brief definition of PTSD that the viewers who watch the show on a regular basis would be already familiar with and aware of, and the main substance that I'm hoping to convey and to pass on to the viewers is really, how do you talk to your children when they are exposed to trauma? That viewers, parents, they may not even be aware of it. They may be aware of it. They might not be aware of it. So really, what are some things to keep in mind and indicators of it to look for, and some strategies? What are some of the things that we need to look at, and how to look at, and how to focus on it, and how to consider this, that a child who's 5 years old is not the same as a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old. So you're going to have to really gear the approach to working with your children in a way that's more age appropriate, as well as developmentally appropriate. And you also need to take into consideration things like culture, language dominance, and special needs. And I know that as an educator, that's something that you are well aware of, and I'm hoping you can share some insights. So let's look at some of the sources of trauma. Don Oscar, por favor, el slide número 3, y déjame saber cuando ya está. Okay, so for the benefit of the viewers, I highlighted the many sources of trauma. So we have natural disasters. You're familiar. We had a bad hurricane season. We had bad tornadoes, deadly blizzards. I don't think we were exposed to too many deadly blizzards, but it's nothing unusual. Earthquakes, yes. We have focused on them. Deadly storms, heat waves. We have had heat waves. Tsunamis, wildfires, accidents. We hear about car accidents, boating accidents, train accidents, elevator accidents, stampedes, soccer games, concerts. So these are some of the situations that we tend to see in terms of accidents, human-made disasters. These are disasters caused by human beings, war, what's happening in Ukraine, displacement caused by civil war or other social unrest, deadly fires that are started, unfortunately, by humans, acts of violence, child abuse, domestic violence, emotional, mental, physical abuse, mayhem. This is like really horrible assaults, physical or sexual assault, rape, sexual abuse, molestation, rioting, urban violence. We saw a lot of that. We're exposed periodically to news pertaining to gang violence. And I know when we had the rioting in the last year of the last president's administration, we were overwhelmed by how much of it we were seeing in the news. Captivity, prostitution, brothels, sex slave trade, organized child exploitation, and of course, acts of terrorism. And acts of terrorism, I did want to share that, certainly we tend to think a lot about terrorism as coming from other parts of the world, international terrorism. But we've had our share of local terrorism. We've had our share of homegrown types of terrorist events, and there's no shortage of it. Oscar, puedes sacar el slide. Dixelia, did I leave anything out?
No, I think you covered everything, but I think what I want to mention is that basically the common thread here is the threat to safety, and things like proximity or how close you are to the traumatic event also may exacerbate how traumatized you may feel.
Okay, let's quickly look at slide number 4 just to give a basic definition. Por favor, Oscar, el cuatro of PTSD. We've talked about PTSD on many times. I just want to rehash it a little bit, very briefly, to give the definition. PTSD, it's an anxiety disorder. It can develop in persons who have had very traumatic, disturbing, or frightening experiences, or they actually lived through it, or they witnessed such events, whether in close proximity, as Celia just mentioned, or at a distance. PTSD officially became recognized as a mental health condition in 1980. It was introduced in the diagnostic cookbook, the classification manual, known as DSM-3, Diagnostic Statistical Manual. This was the 3rd edition. Just to give you a sense now, we are now in DSM-5, the 5th edition. And I'm guessing that anytime soon, we'll probably get a DSM-5R. So let's see what happens. Oscar, puedes sacar el 3?
I believe it may be out. I don't know. I believe it may be coming out soon if it's not out yet.
Oscar, por favor, me puedes poner. Let's look at some of the symptoms. El número 5, por favor, Oscar. These are some typical symptoms that children experience in the face of trauma. It's not, it doesn't include every imaginable symptom. As I've indicated before, it's difficult to cover everything in a show that lasts a little bit over an hour. I try to stretch it into 75 minutes, but it's difficult to cover everything. It's hard. But I think that this is a fair representation of the bulk, typical kinds of symptoms that we see in children. Depending on the age, there may be separation anxiety, regression, again, that may be more age-related with younger children, fear of the dark, fear of sleeping alone, again, more probably for the younger children. Behavioral changes, you're going to see across all changes. Mood changes, you'll see that across all changes. By mood changes, I mean, irritability, anxiety, depression, going from one to the other. Enuresis, more likely, again, with the younger population, loss of control of bedwetting. The enuresis is bedwetting. Physical complaints, you're going to see this across the board for different chronological ages, and school changes in school performance. That covers, I think, the full gamut, and again, that covers all age ranges. Oscar, por favor, puedes sacar eso. So, Dixelia, let me leave it to you to either add to that or comment, because I covered some of them are more for children, and others really cover the full gamut.
Yes, definitely. So in terms of things like separation anxiety, right? We know that a lot of children, especially some of our immigrants' children, have been separated from their families when they're immigrating to the United States. So that a lot of these can have lifelong sort of innate sort of effects in life. And a lot, so it's very context specific in terms of how we experience trauma, how we relate to others, and it's basically how we overcome. We'll talk about exactly how we overcome those traumatic experiences as well.
So, no, go ahead, finish up.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to ask you because, obviously, we adults and children, we're exposed to trauma, pretty much on a daily basis. But there's been, in my opinion, and I'm well, not just my opinion, research supports this, major changes due to the impact of COVID-19. We are just last month, March of 2022 marked the second year of COVID-19 for the general population at large. I want to sort of leave out the fact that there were professionals and politicians and high-ranking people in the industry of medicine and politics who were aware of it, probably going back to February of 1999. 1999, and then in March of 2000 is when we started experiencing the major shutdowns and working from home and mandatory stay at home and isolations and so forth. So, do you perceive presently now, April of 22, are there lingering effects due to COVID because children maybe, say, with separation anxiety, they became perhaps overly attached to a maternal figure or paternal figure that provided the nurturing to the child and did more of the schooling from home virtually? Was there, in your opinion, an increase in some of those regression kinds of symptoms that I mentioned in the last slide?
We definitely see and continue to see some students who are sort of what we're calling right now school avoidant. And so they're not coming to school, but really what that means is that they're anxious to come to school. And we have some students who, because of that, have increased anxiety, maybe depression. For the younger student, we also have younger students who may manifest themselves more as that attachment piece that we're talking about. But in the middle school and the high school, we're seeing the manifestation of more the anxiety and the depression, which comes out in terms of immaturity, difficulty connecting with each other, not feeling a sense of belonging in school, anxiety, outburst behaviors. We have, for example, teachers are saying that, our ninth graders in high school are more like seventh graders. And when you think about it, the fact that some of the children have been away from that socialization that takes so much of their life in that period, because there's identity development happening, and also the learning that happens through socialization that has been negatively impacted through COVID. So yeah, we do see some manifestation that have been negative because of the lockdown. Aside from the fact, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No.
Aside from the fact that we don't know what kind of stressors they experience at home lockdown, right? We've had seen an increase of domestic violence and things like that that also have impacted children while they were at home. And the fact that school historically in the research has been noted as a protective factor for mental health.
I'm glad that you brought that up about the impact of domestic violence and other kinds of similar kinds of stressors, meaning that COVID-19 really is a risk factor. It's a risk factor for stress and behavioral changes and emotional changes impact on health and mental health. What I've mentioned to the viewers on other occasions, and I'll repeat it again today, is that when we get these kinds of statistics, whether or not it's related to statistics collected during COVID-19, but even prior to COVID-19, you are depending on people who are reporting these kinds of things So there's a certain amount of guesstimation that takes place, and there's an under-reporting. So if you get a certain number and you think, my God, this looks really huge, chances are very good that the real picture is worse, that you have more, and it's just people are not reporting it as much. In terms of the children in Ukraine, if and as they begin to return to Ukraine, I'm going to predict that you're going to start seeing increased in separation anxiety. And also, if you think that what is it, like 2.5 million refugees in Poland, how they're going to be accommodated and what the kinds of trauma they're experiencing, even in a friendly. This is a friendly country that's doing the best they can to provide them safe haven and all the amenities that they need. They're going to be in for a long haul, and by long haul, and this is, I think, applicable to some of the situations that our children here in the United States are experimenting and experiencing. Long haul means really years. You know, where the PTSD is something that the children separated at the border. This is not something that's going to go away anytime soon. And what happens also, and feel free to add to it, but you know, all of a sudden somebody has a bad dream or a nightmare, or they see something on TV that reminds them of it, or there's something in the news that reminds them of it, or there's a new incident that sort of looks like it again. And it's like you're reliving the trauma all over again. And these are some things that can last. And with the physical, medical, health aspects of COVID-19, we've already talked about long haul COVID. These are things that can drag on for quite a while. You know, the sluggish brain, changes in sense of taste, and smell. Some of these kinds of things that we're not even aware yet because it's been 2 years. So we're not aware yet of the neuropsychological impact, and it's going to be years from now that we'll still be studying it. And COVID-19 did not go away anyway. So it's still here with us. Okay, so I wanted to start with the talking to children. Okay, and I'm going to rely heavily on you for that, Sally, so I'm giving you a warning. Don Oscar, por favor, el slide 6, el 6. I broke up the information that you provided into 2 slides, Tixelia, okay?
Sure. So
yes, Oscar. So the talking to children, you know, like we need to again focus what trauma, you know, context specific, things like making time to talk. What does the child know? Take cues. I don't really want to steal your thunder, but I put up a couple. Do you want to keep the slide up and you talk about it, Excelia?
Sure. Either way,
why don't you
fine.
keep it up and go over it, okay? And then when we're done with it, I'll ask Oscar to pull it down and we'll go to the next slide, okay?
Sure. So definitely, as we mentioned previously, it's important to think about the developmental age of the child, the chronological age, and also the developmental age, right? We have 12, 14-year-olds who are very immature, for example. So we want to make sure that first and foremost, the student feels safe to have a conversation and to assess what is it that they do know. So for 5-year-olds who you may not want to talk about the war at all. But if they see a glance of something on the television, you might want to say, you know, that's just something, a war is going on, without going into necessarily detail, and change the channel and move on. Whereas a high schooler may feel, like we were saying, on top of COVID and whatever stressors they may be feeling. Now, a war may be very much concerning to a high schooler who may be asking questions like, or do we think we're going into World War III, right? So having those conversations is important, and also knowing how to navigate those conversations if need be. And I think what is important to digest for a parent is that you don't have to know all the answers, especially because we don't know what's going to happen. So make sure that you're not saying something that is untrue. So we want to also make sure that we investigate how the student is being affected and what we're seeing around the child. Sometimes we don't realize that our little child is also observing and watching and modeling everything we do and say. And so even conversations around the war, maybe even if they're not necessarily seeing it on TV for like the 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, may be impactful. So we want to think about how has it affected the child. So what kinds of symptoms is a child relating or not? We want to make sure that we encourage children to verbalize their thoughts, their feelings, and their reactions. There with social media and more children getting access to social media, unfortunately, as parents, is also harder to keep, sort of keep them in a bubble, if you will, from like the dangers of the world, right? So make sure that we are also watching and being vigilant of what they're seeing and hearing. And basically want to listen, empathize, and affirm whatever the feelings are of the child. We want to make sure that they're feeling heard. We want to make sure that they feel safe having the conversation. We want to make sure that we keep any explanations developmentally appropriate. And make sure that we are also separating for children what is reality from what is imagined fear, right? So making sure that we're gauging where their reasoning is as well. I don't know if there's anything else we wanted to add to that slide.
Isn't it true that puedes sacar el slide, Oscar? No pongas el próximo todavía. Puedes sacar ese. Isn't it true that 5-year-old and 6-year-olds sort of like live in a magical world? That they live in a magical world, and that they sort of think that that if mommy or daddy are angry or getting separated, that they had something to do with it, and that they're to blame over it, or that they're the ones that caused this monster to show up all of a sudden. They live in a, largely it's like a make-believe fantasy world for these children. And I hear people say, oh, the little man of the house. Who's the little man of the house? I mean, who's the little man? Children are little adults. No, they're not. Children are children. Do you see that a lot, or do you have parents who sort of like need to get reminders that this age group is a very magical, fantasy-oriented type of a time of life?
Yeah, it's interesting, there's trauma behind the parentified child as well, right? So if children are not allowed to be children, allowed to be imaginative, and are sort of put into this category of an older child or an older person, they tend to lose some of the their ability to enjoy their childhood. And then we see some traumas associated with that later on. Like being overly independent, for example, when we may not see that as something negative, but if someone has difficulty asking for help because they're always sort of used to historically to depend on themselves, they were probably a parentified child to begin with. So as we also sort of socially applaud a child who may act a little bit more mature, but children need to be children so that they enjoy the progress of development normally and typically throughout the lifespan.
I don't have any hard data to back this thing up, although I think that my instinct is probably accurate. That stemming from the pandemic, that children who perhaps were more mature were placed in more of a caretaking role with parents who were really emotionally affected or devastated by it, and or perhaps even having to have more of a caring parental role with younger children and siblings. I mean, I know that in real life I see this from time to time. I don't know if you've experienced that or you've seen that in school.
Absolutely. I mean, that happens all the time when there's a parent who who maybe does not have the trust in another adult individual, and unfortunately develops more of a friendship type of relationship with an older child. And so that also may create a codependent relationship that also is hurtful for the child's childhood. It's not good for the dynamic of the household necessarily in terms of what that attachment may look like.
I also wanted to ask you, I had put up that we need to look at how the child has been affected at home, at school, and socially. And there's nothing that indicates that all three have to be the same. So you may get a picture of what the child looks like at school, and the parents have a completely different picture at home, and socially they could be more into bullying or being bullied. You'll see different kinds of things. Anything to say about that? There's no
Sure.
correlation that they have to be the same across these three different contexts.
Right. So context really matters, and the difference is is dependent on how they relate to the world and within that context. So, for example, at home, a child may be quite independent and be able to take care of their younger sibling, but at school they may be having difficulty with peer relationships and conflict resolution skills socially. So definitely is context dependent. This child does not have to present equally the same within those contexts.
So yeah, so of course that becomes very important. I'm sort of guessing that because you're in the role of a school psychologist. I studied school psychology ancient history ago, but I'm not in the field looking at it myself presently. But it must be somewhat difficult, I imagine, when you have parents who you're trying to give feedback, or the teacher is trying to give feedback about the behavioral kinds or academic kinds of issues that are taking place in school. And the parent says, no, not my Miguelito. No,
Mhm.
no, he's like, wonderful God's gift to the world. And you have to, try to say, well, we're not seeing it. I'm not sure how difficult it must be. I'm guessing you probably have to red flag some parents for special treatment. I don't know, but it's got to be sometimes very challenging.
It is challenging, and one of the things that we're also seeing is that perspective taking. So the ability for children to see, to read social cues and interpret them from the other person's point of view has been somewhat impaired, and I think that those conflicts in terms between peers, we're seeing more and more because
I mean,
those social cues are and interpret them and get feedback. And so, we have had some difficulties with that as well.
yeah, your audio cut off a little bit, so
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
hoping that the viewers didn't miss too much of it. I wanted as well, because of the pandemic, where children have become much more internet dependent. I'm wondering if you have seen an increased proliferation in cyberbullying.
We have actually, and just inappropriate use of the internet in general. There's students who, yes, who tend to say very obviously, because it's easy to hide behind a screen or behind a tagline, right? Are very inappropriate online, and that has obviously then trickled into fights and discourse in schools. But there's also younger children who are just lacking the appropriate judgment of what to post or not to post online, because they're not developmentally ready to have cell phones. And yet, how many 8-year-olds have cell phones nowadays without parental blockers, for example? So yeah, it's definitely some area of concern.
Yeah, I'm reminding of the joke. It's somewhat off topic, but I think it's it's a good example of the young child who is on the internet and typing away, and like on some sort of a website, and yells, "Mom, what's your social security number?" So obviously we see a lot of victimization and taking advantage by people who are trolling. They're trolling, and for some people, it's all, actually with children, the risk is grooming. Grooming kinds of behaviors, and not just grooming in terms of inappropriate sexual kinds of things, which is certainly out there. But the grooming here is also grooming them in terms of other kinds of things that might give away information and access to information and data that later can really be very damaging, not only to the child but to the family. We're going to move on to the next slide. This is part 2. So, don Oscar, por favor, el número 7. So here we're continuing again. I'm going to put it up there mostly for you to take the lead. It's not just talking to children, but some suggestions for things that parents can do. So talk plus tips for parents and caretakers to make the situation safer for the children. So Dixelia, please take it away.
Sure. So definitely we want to limit what they see on TV or what they see on social media. And for adults too, I know for myself, I like to be informed, but if I'm watching the same negative, whether it's the war, whether it's about COVID, whatever it is, there is a point where it starts affecting you emotionally. And so you have to gauge yourself as an adult too, but definitely limiting the TV viewing for children and the social media exposure. Also making sure that you have a brief, clear information with reassurance when you're relating something. So you could say, it sounds like you're worried about our safety. Let's think about how our school and community are working to keep us safe. So that acknowledges the child's feelings, but also reassures the child that there is a safety in the home, safety in the community, safety at school, that is not necessarily guaranteed. You're not guaranteeing it. That's the difference. But you're suggesting that there are things that are being done to keep the child safe within certain environments. You want to focus on hope and the positive outlook and expectations moving forward. If you see any, distress, then you want to make sure that you acknowledge those distress and give the student coping mechanisms to deal with those stressors. You want to also think about the cultural sensitivity, how much or how little the student may understand the language, and students with special needs too. You want to be protective of how much reasoning they can take, how much understanding they may have, for example, and definitely seek professional care if needed. So when a student sees or a child sees something negative and reacts, some of that reaction may be normal or typical, but if that reaction or the stress becomes something that is debilitating, that is a significant change in behavior, mood, and things like that, then that's when you have to seek outside support.
So seeking professional care, and or some reliable sources of support. That doesn't really mean going to the social media and posting, Juanito did this, I'm so angry at him, and then somebody responds and they tell you what to do about it. That's not necessarily proper professional care, is it?
No.
That's not
We
the
want to
best
make
source of
sure that
information.
we're giving them the right emotional support at home and the right professional support, whether that's, through talking to a counselor at school or a social worker or a psychologist, whether that's talking, even if it's, you want you yourself or the child wants to talk to a pastor or religious figure, for example. Those are different types of emotional supports depending on the gravity of the situation, what
Yeah,
what
so,
would be
so, so,
beneficial.
so some friends may be serious and responsible and provide good information. That's fine. Teachers, of course, your kids are in
Right.
school. That has to be a main source of parents with children, obviously seeking some help and confiding with the teachers and trying to get some sort of feedback from them. It can be, religious sources, uh, pastoral counselors, or religious figures that the family trusts and believes in, and of course, above and beyond that, seeking the help of psychologists and social workers, psychiatrists, mental health counselors, and so forth. Um, all of that is pretty important. We've covered pretty much this. Anything else to add to that?
I just want to mention something that I just thought of, like during COVID, for example, that community support is important. So when we talk about different contexts of exposure, we also talk about different contexts of support. So it could be individual support, friendship support, or community support. And then during COVID, for example, when there was a death, we had a lot of people who adapted to like doing funerals online. That's the type of community sort of support, right? Or birthdays online, for example. That's a type of communal societal support of the stressors that COVID has sort of exacerbated. So those are also types of supports.
Which still should be encouraged, because we're
Of
not
course.
out of the woods, and there's no reason why we cannot have a hybrid. Even in those situations that children are actually physically going to school, there's nothing preventing some sort of virtual learning and virtual contacts with the family members who are in Atlanta, or in Florida. Obviously, you're not going to wait for them to come to see you. It's important to maintain that kind of connection. I have repeatedly told the viewers that what we're looking at in terms of staying safe is physical distancing, not social distancing. Unfortunately, it's a misnomer calling it social distancing. We are really in the need of social togetherness, not social distancing. Physical distancing is something. And I would alert the viewers that depending on where you live, what state you're in, to be aware of what the state's requirements are and what the research looks like and what the data show in your particular state. New York, for instance, that I live in, has gone into a yellow alert. Green is pretty much the lowest level, which doesn't mean that nothing is going on. It's just like what if you want to consider it in quotes, and I hate to do this, because I don't think any deaths are acceptable. But we're looking at something that's considered an acceptable range, so it's green, and it goes above that, in quotes, acceptable range, and we move into yellow, and higher than that is red. New York is already in yellow. I haven't eyeballed it today, so I'm not sure if that's changed. I know that central New York, there were some concerns that COVID was higher than the state average. Just looking at the state average, central New York was higher. So I'm not sure if that applies to you in Westchester. Is Westchester considered part of central New York or downstate?
No, not really. It's lower Hudson. Westchester is really lower Hudson, but we do see the different COVID sort of cases uptick alongside other things like the flu, alongside seasonal allergies and other things that are hard to they have similar symptoms and are hard to determine what they are. But one of the things their schools are doing are they are very being very vigilant about giving students those immediate COVID tests to do at home. And we're coming up on a spring break next week, for example, and we're making sure that every child takes one of those homes so they can test themselves before coming back. So
Right.
it's still COVID to me is still live and well, unfortunately. When it's still not out of the woods yet. However, there are some things that we can do to exert some control over our lives when we feel that we have none.
So green, don't be fooled. Green doesn't mean you're fine. You know, green doesn't mean that everything's back to square one. Unfortunately, I believe that many people have been sort of lulled into a sense that, wow, we're going back, things are opening up, restaurants, bars, I can get a haircut now without wearing a mask. That there's been these kinds of changes, and it's unfortunate to the extent that there's some belief that we're back to normal. We're not back to normal. We will never go back to that. What we're going to go into, we're not going back, we're going to go into something that will become a new normal. And it's not necessarily a bad new normal. It's a new normal where we exercise proper care, proper eating habits, proper sleep, proper nutrition, proper distancing, proper precautions, proper sanitation, sanitizing ourselves, going to doctors. That's not a bad thing. It's going to be slipping into a new normal. And I would really prefer that the viewers think about that. And with that, life will go on. There's no reason that it has to be a bad thing. So that's just really a word of caution. Let's look into the some aspects of treatment, okay? So, Don Oscar, por favor, pone el slide número 8. So, Dixeli, I'm going to cover these briefly, quickly. I'm just going to rattle them off quickly. I'll ask Oscar then to take it down, and we can sort of get into more of a discussion. Relaxation, stress management techniques. These have to be child age, chronology, and developmentally appropriate. Correct mistaken beliefs. We were alluding to that before. Mm-hmm. Parents have to tell children, it's okay to say I don't know everything, which is accurate also, because not only is it that you don't know everything, but we also get a flurry of different beliefs, different news media, different sources. Somebody may say, well, this is how I perceive it. This is my thought. This is what I think has to happen. And it may not be the same as somebody else. So is it wrong? Not necessarily. You have to consider what are the best sources of information for you. How reliable are they? How valid are they? To where are you getting the sources of information? And more specifically, for you, yourself, your family, your children, does this make sense to you? So correct mistaken beliefs. Exposure strategies, I'm going to leave that to you to talk a little bit about it, because we're facing this all the time. We're going to be exposed to trauma. We are exposed to trauma. When does it become toxic? How much of it seems to be okay? And does it, in fact, a little bit of it develop resilience? Develop a narrative. This is probably a good exercise. Talk. What is it that you can tell about this situation? Tell me a story about it. What is it that you understand? Give me a paragraph. Talk a paragraph. Write a paragraph. Give me some sort of a narrative. Talk about the trauma, the active parental involvement, the whole family participation. I envision maybe a family roundtable discussion. They get together, they talk about some of these things. Education about the trauma, many different ways. Again, consider the source. And pets. We had a show, last show with the NISPA president, Dr. Barbara Kapetanakis, where we focused on pets. Pets have a tremendous curative effect, a positive effect on health, mental health benefits. I strongly encourage families that have them, by all means, this is a source of support. And if you're thinking about getting it back, we talked about that last show. Viewers are encouraged to go back, look at number 70, adult with pets. See if you're able to, or if you're ready to have a pet, and what the wonderful miracle of owning a pet. Oscar, por favor, puedes sacar el slide. So Dixelia, take it away, please.
Sure. So anything that when we talk about relaxation or stress management techniques, so you're talking about like basically practicing gratitude, meditating, yoga, those are things that are going to relax the nervous system and kind of center you and help you connect with your mind and body. What happens in a trauma state is that the brain goes into the state of trying to protect you, and that protective part of the brain, what we call the animal brain or the reptilian brain, may just react to things when you're in a trauma response. And so what you want to do is calm your nervous system with those relaxation techniques. Well, going back to what you were saying about the narrative, part of the narrative piece is journaling, for example, there's a lot of research behind journaling and making sure that you're telling the story, but also journaling about what you're feeling in that instance, and that how cathartic and therapeutic that can be. I don't know if you have had a specific experience in therapy with people doing that, but I'm always a fan of journaling to process any trauma-like experience. In terms of talking specifically to children about trauma, one of the things that I wanted to emphasize was that sometimes, when they ask, especially if we're talking about the war, if a child, for example, asks things like, when will this all end? Or even with COVID, when will this all end? Just acknowledging that, it's frustrating, just saying something like it's frustrating to not know for certain when this is going to dissipate. That can be very unconcerning, but just that acknowledgement of the feeling to that child is so important. Other things to say to a child, for example, I don't know. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, it's hard not to have all the answers. Those are just key phrases to say to a child as well. And just being upfront in terms of your own feelings too, and how you're managing. The one thing that I wanted to say for parents too is that children take your coping mechanisms and how you deal with stressful situations. They learn from you. And so if you're in a state of distress, in a state of panic, they're gonna sense that, and they're more likely to react in that way as well.
So Dixelia, I'm going to put you on the spot if that's okay. If you're uncomfortable and it traumatizes,
I don't think I could say no if it wasn't okay.
If it traumatizes you too much, let me know. But I would like to do a role play. I'll be a 7-year-old and your mommy. Okay. We'll do it spontaneously. Is that okay?
Sure.
Very spontaneous clip. Okay. So, mommy, you know how yesterday, cousin Sally came to visit, and she's like older than I am, and we were talking, and she's got this like wonderful, I think it's called an iPad. She's got this like big iPad, and she showed me some of these things, and she said that these are pictures from Ukraine. I mean, I know I've heard about it. I've been watching it in the news, but I saw a child. I saw a child and a mother, and it scared me. I mean, I said, oh my God, it's like I can't believe. I don't know what to say. I'm scared. I mean, I was left really, really scared, and I just wanted to tell you this, that I was really scared, and I don't know what to say.
Well, thank you for telling me, and I'm so sorry that you saw those images. That Ukraine is a country that is having a lot of difficulties right now because some people are going against each other in something that we call war. But be sure that is not happening here, that you're safe with mommy, and that you're safe at school, that is not going to happen to you.
Can can you yell at Sally and punish her because she showed me this?
I will
she
definitely have a
scared me.
conversation with
I
Sally
was
about
so
what's
scared
appropriate
by
to show
this,
you.
you know? I was so scared, and I felt part of me felt bad because, you know, I'm a boy and I'm supposed to, you know, grin and bear it. And they say, you know, boys aren't supposed to show their emotions. You have to be tough. And I looked at it and I felt like crying.
Well, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry about what you saw as well. It's okay to not know what you feel and to feel scared. So and I just want you to know that with me, you're safe. And that I'm going to protect you as much as I can, and that war is happening very far away from here. We do care about those people, but that war is happening far. I think one of the things here that I'm trying to do is try sort of validate the child's emotions, and so you might
Mommy,
want
what
to give
does
it.
validate mean? I mean, come on, I'm only 7 years old.
Sorry, I went back into my therapeutic sort of presentation mode right now.
I don't have a Webster's for 7-year-olds with me.
No, but you know, making the child feel safe and detaching them a little bit from what they saw, I think it's helpful in that situation. And obviously talking to Sally, if that was the name that you mentioned.
So, you do know, Mommy, that I'm in the 2nd grade, yes? I mean, you're aware of this, right? So in school, the teacher has talked about it, but nobody has done, you know, has looked at pictures or photos or anything like that. We haven't been asked to make drawings about it. I feel, you know, I do feel bad about what's going on. And I'm wondering if I could maybe write a letter or something.
Well,
That
you can write a letter.
you could mail it to a child in Ukraine or somebody, because just to let them know that I feel so bad about what they're feeling. I don't know if that would be a good thing to do.
I think that's a great idea. Why don't you draw a letter and draw a picture, write a letter and draw a picture of what you hope will happen in the future for that person. Something positive that you feel that they need to hear right now.
I want to include a picture of our little dog Hercules as well.
That's an awesome idea.
All right, we're gonna go off script. Thanks. It was fun. I didn't traumatize you too much, did I?
No.
Except for the validate. So
No, but I think it's important for people to know that they don't have to have the exact verbiage either. Like, I think sometimes as parents, we feel like it has to be exactly right, or it has to be exactly this, right? I think the idea is to make sure that the student feels heard, the child feels heard, this child feels safe, and the child feels comfortable talking to you and having us and about their feelings, and also giving them a sense of hope and control over their present lives as well.
And come to me whenever you want to. I mean, you don't have to, like, just when I open it up for discussion. I'm especially concerned about vulnerable kids. Any sort of message to parents in terms of things to look at, like behavioral changes or verbal kinds of changes, and they warrant closer attention.
Yeah, so, you know, parents are very in tune in terms of who their child is. So if you see any sudden change in behavior, whether that's a sudden change in the negative direction or the positive direction, so a child who all of a sudden has a lot of tantrums, all of a sudden doesn't want to eat, who is locked up in the room, when they tend to be social, you know, any big changes in behaviors, I think in general should be at least inquired about. I noticed, Johnny, that you have been spending a lot of time in your room and not talking to us as much, and I'm getting worried. So I'm wondering, is there something that I need to know? There's something happening, you know, just whatever that change in behavior is. I think it's important to acknowledge it and try to dig a little deeper to let them know that you care and that you're concerned.
I know there's a huge mistake around the concept of self-injurious behavior.
Mm.
And I know that there's a lot of myths about it and worries about it. One might be that, children tend not to have thoughts that are destructive to themselves or self-injurious, and that perhaps not talking about it, it'll go away. And I'm wondering if you would have any sort of suggestions if there are those kinds of concerns or changes in behavior where the child is more passive. Well, even aggressive children may impulsively do something
Yeah.
destructive.
Unfortunately, things like obviously the students who tend to hurt themselves tend to suffer from anxiety and or depression. And unfortunately, a child as young as 5, 6 year old has completed suicide, and so we do need to be in tuned and aware. And unfortunately, hindsight is always 2020. So what the research talks about in terms of suicidal ideation is that there has been some precursors or pre-markers that of something happening to a child that sometimes, unfortunately, as adults we miss. So yeah, it is of concern, and we had a mental health crisis prior to the pandemic. Now that we know that mental health crisis is even that much higher, and actually what we're seeing is the fact that many of our youth, for example, when they were in school, we were able to catch them and kind of say, okay, Johnny or Stella, whoever, I see that you're walking around more lethargic, like this, what's happening? Can I help you? What's going on? Those are opportunities we've missed because of COVID. So what we're seeing now is an increase of the aftermath of not having those preventative sort of protective factors there. So we're having more students being hospitalized, more students exhibiting the cutting behaviors, which is based on an underlying anxiety of not or difficulty coping to something. So yeah, we definitely see that.
So talk is good, avoidance is bad.
Exactly.
Okay. We're coming to the end. Oscar, por favor, we have several resources. ¿Me puede poner los slide número 9? Déjame saber, Oscar, si cabe. ¿Cabe todo? ¿Todo cabe en el slide o no? Okay, manténlo. Keep it up, okay? So, dear viewers, I have, information on how to contact me to the left, Dr. Roy Aranda, Long Island Psychological Consultant. Also through the show, Dr. Peter Canaris, who I've mentioned before as a consultant. You have information about how to contact him, phone number, and so forth. Celia Lopez, you provided me with your email address and Twitter handle at the top. So thank you very much. If you have any further questions to ask. National Association of School Psychologists, NASP, I gave you the website there, and that's also in deference not only to Dixelia, but also to Peter, who previously was a guest 2 shows ago. New York Association of School Psychologists, underneath that, you also have their website. Now, I put some material that Dixelia provided for me, supporting youth affected by the war in Ukraine, tips for parents. There's a link there. You have to you're going to have to type it in or access it tomorrow on the internet and click the link. But it's very useful information, and it's not just tips for parents in terms of the war in Ukraine, but you certainly can use it for other areas of trauma. In Spanish, we have the same thing. Thank you, Dixelia. Apoyo a los jóvenes afectados por la guerra en Ucrania, consejos para padres. There is the link. Beneath that, from SAMHSA, there's recognizing and treating child traumatic stress. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful source. The American Psychological Association has provided this particular link, resources for children trauma. It's an update. You have the link there. National Child Traumatic Stress Network, you see their link there. As usual, I allude to my psychological association in New York, New York State Psychological Association, NISPA. I've given you the information and the website there. They're the premier association for psychologists in the state of New York. Beneath them, the American Psychological Association, their phone number, contact information, website. Both NISPA and APA provide tremendous resources that are educational and informative to the public. So all you have to do is really just go on to the website and check it in. For people who are in other states, all states have their own psychological association. I've mentioned that before. Like New Jersey Psychological Association, they have NJPA, California CPA. So all the states and provinces have their psychological association. And my region is Suffolk County Psychological Association. I've given you phone number and contact information. It's wonderful the amount of educational resources and contact and potential access to psychologists who specialize in different kinds of psychological issues and needs and problems is made available at their website. Oscar, ¿puedes sacar el slide? Did I leave anything out? Did I leave anything out, Dixelia?
No, I think you covered a lot of great materials here.
So with that, that's a wrap. I just wanted to offer you the opportunity to share some last parting thoughts to the viewers before we end today.
I just want to thank everyone for watching. Definitely keep in contact with me if you have any questions, need any support. I am very happy to have had this opportunity, and I hope that you know that we're all in this together, and we can put in place some strategies, for ourselves and our children, so that we have some hope for the future. So I hope you found this helpful.
Great, thank you. Oscarcito, ¿algo para los televidentes? ¿Cómo? A lot of greetings. He keeps promising every show to send me some pupusas revueltas. I have yet to wait for them. Maybe one day. I know I'm planning to have some arroz candules, lechon, cuchifritos afterwards. So I'm gonna make it a multicultural meal later tonight, even though it's like very late. I haven't eaten all day long, and I am hungry. To my viewers, thank you for watching. One of the things that I really hope that you get out of the show is the intent on my part, on Vixelia's part, on the part of the producers of the show, really to make the show not only informative, but empowering. I want to leave you with something that you have the power, you have tools, you have things that you can put to use. It's not all, oh my God, how horrible. I don't want to leave you with that. I want to leave you with resilience, post-traumatic growth, stress management, positive psychology. There are things that you can do. And that's what I'm hoping that you gain from not only my shows in general, but from this one in particular. I want to empower you and your children. And I tend to be, like I've said before, a glass half full kind of person. I see positive things. I look for silver linings. I look for positive things in our future. We will have a new reality. And I don't think it's going to be a bad reality. Lord knows we've lived through God knows how many centuries, and we've survived. So there's going to be a good new reality for all of us. To my viewers, stay safe. Keep your family and children safe. Be aware of who your children interact with, who their friends are, what they're looking at on social media, who they're communicating with on their phones. Be aware of your neighbors. Make sure if you don't see somebody, check in on them that they're okay. Stay in tune with your community. Look out for the safety and health of everybody. Everybody stay healthy, stay safe. I'll see you probably later this month. So Celia, muchas gracias. Thank you very much for being
Thank you, everyone.
A valuable, informed guest. Thank you for the assistance with the slides. Oscar y Tribuna TV, thank you, the producers. Gracias a todos los televidentes. And with that said, it's a wrap. So buenas noches.